Hello, everybody, and welcome back to this discussion on the development of a Spotify playlist creating genetic algorithm. So this is basically an analysis of the search space, which is all of the values that we can have and the possible combinations. So I'm first going to lead y'all through some of how the data analysis, and then I will show you guys the actual data. So first off, I will explain these charts here. This is the charts generated from a paper that I used to analyze Spotify music, and they used a tool that they had found which basically brought in various attributes that Spotify applies to songs and used it for their data analysis. And this is just that person's favorites list. I actually hand generated the data from their GitHub page. It didn't turn out as well because I wasn't using it as I intended. Once I figured that out, I generated my data based on my favorites list, which is the main source of data for today. And basically, this is kind of like the TS&E graph of the most average music that I have, or the typical space for it to be. A map of my music. There are 198 total songs with a huge range of variables on them. And that's where this map is generated. Now, you definitely see a correlation between the release year and the loudness. So this is a good time to point out the difference between the consistency and the variance score that I want to apply to things. So consistency will look at how much of 2020 songs are in the final playlist. Now, why I say that is because most of my music seems to be kind of right in this area. So how close together are they? Now, I probably would use how low is the standard deviation, compared to, for instance, if it included the oldest song in my collection and consistently added that to every single one, that would increase the variance, but it would reduce the consistency slightly. But the consistency would really help here, as well as if you have like an author. So variance would count the number of authors, and the consistency would count the average number of songs per author, which usually only have 1 to 2 per author, but sometimes there are more. One of my favorite artists is Owlsteady, for instance, and I have 5 or 6 of his songs. So we'll see how that affects the final output. But right here is the main components of this. So most of the data is fairly normal, and I'm not going to dive too deep into them. But for instance, beats per minute is around 120, which from my experience with music, that is actually fairly typical, so I wouldn't be too worried about that one. Energy level, acousticness, and release year are the ones that might give us some trouble because they do have kind of the highest value on our system. But the goal with the consistency versus variance system is that essentially it should help to flatten these curves down to properly fit the actual music. Now, the inputs would be basically how well you would order these. So, like, I prefer all my songs to have a high energy level and a low acoustic level. Or maybe I want my songs to all have a very high variance in energy and a very low and a very high consistency and acousticness. So I'm going to rank these according to the preference. And so I'm going to add a ranked order for the data analysis during each generation. And then we also have a song duration. It's around, now they measured it in seconds. It's actually about 3 minutes, which I'll show you in the actual raw data, which is right here on this CSV file. So we have an arc of the preference. This is a value I added by hand for myself and my preference of each of these songs. And so you have kind of this, how likely am I to skip it out of 10 for this song is how I measured it. So none of them hit 1 because that would be, I was always going to skip it. These are all my favorites list, so I'm not going to skip them. And then the length is around 3 minutes on the average. And because of this, we have about 198 songs, almost 200. And basically, for each song, you have around, for a 30-minute time period, you'd only be able to pick 10 of those songs-ish to play without repeat. If it has to repeat, then it gets cut off. Then how close it gets to that is the most important thing. I'd actually rather be slightly over than slightly under. So if it's under time, it gets completely nixed. But the closer it is to being exactly 30 minutes is how likely I would, how much I would prefer that specific playlist. And then the final output will be just an array of these songs, likely in a title artist row column system. That way I can either hand create the playlist or later on create the playlist using the Spotify API. But I do hope that y'all have a wonderful rest of your day. And make sure to leave comments in Canvas or on the YouTube channel, and I will try to answer them as quickly as possible. Have a wonderful day.